Here we go. Here we go. All right. If you'll enter into the chat box, what do you need to feel safe? What do you need from us as a group participating here to feel safe, to have an open and honest conversation today? And if somebody will just share some of those comments.
Paula, this is Barbara.
Yes, Barbara.
Non-judgmental. For people to be, and the opposite of that, of course, would be very open to listening to each other, to understand.
Non-judgmental and open to listening. Very good.
Okay. We have in the chat open and transparent. We have no judgment, a dose of humor, honesty, acknowledgement, respect, to accept that I am coming from a place of love and respect, even if I have trouble, even if we all have different ethnic. Okay, I'm blending my reading here, it's moving fast. To accept I am coming from a place of love and respect, even if I have trouble expressing my thoughts.
Absolutely.
Respect and all inclusive of all different ethnic backgrounds.
Hi, this is Patricia Clarkson. I think it's important to be honest with what you feel, what you see, your perception, because I honestly believe that we can't move forward if you aren't honest, because then we're moving in a direction that we're trying to fix or move in a direction that really isn't the direction we need to move in, because nobody wanted to hurt anybody's feelings. So saying things tactfully, but being honest.
Honestly. Honesty. Absolutely.
Well, I'll add one thing that
yes.
One thing that we ask our clients to do, we need to be able to embrace the feeling of uncomfortableness. Some of the things we'll say will make you look inwardly and inadvertently feel uncomfortable. Embrace it. Don't push it away. Don't excuse it. Don't rationalize it. Hold it. Give yourself a chance to look at it and explore it for what it is.
Very good, ChiChi. Absolutely. Okay. So thank you all for sharing those both verbally and in the chat. I think we have a tall order for each other here today, but I am confident that we will be able to create that space for everyone. Okay, so we're going to start off with a definition here. The conversation is about bias. And so when we think of bias, and this is just a straight up Wikipedia definition, it is the disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. We're going to be talking about the differences between innate and learned biases, just a little bit about that. And we're going to talk about implicit and explicit bias. So if we can all agree that this will be the definition that we will work with today. Okay, so we will deal with the one that is frankly a lot easier, because we can see it, we can feel it, and we know when it's happening generally. Explicit bias. And these are those attitudes and those beliefs that we have about people or groups of people on a conscious level. We know we're feeling them. we know that we are saying things. Much of the time, these biases and their expression arise as the direct result of a perceived threat. Now, the thing is about explicit bias. When people perceive that their biases are valid, whatever they may be, they are more likely to justify unfair treatment or even violence. We've seen a lot of that in the social media, in the news, and in fact, one very, very horrible example of that has ignited this point in time where we are right now. Discrimination and hate speech, of course, are expressions of very clear expressions of explicit bias. And they occur as a result of conscious thought, very deliberate thought. And the good news about that is that they can be consciously regulated. And I say the good news about it is, although it may not be the best way of going about it, but when there are social norms in place, people tend to not act out on these. So for instance, ChiChi might be able to share the fact she's in human resources for those of you who don't know her. And human resources is a lot about compliance. ChiChi, how much of what you would say is part of compliance and policies and procedures address things like explicit bias?
A lot. For instance, my organization just put out a policy on civility. We live in a world when you have to have a policy that tells you need to be civil to each other. That is talking about conscious regulation. You might want to do these things, but there is repercussions to doing it.
That's right. So consequences that might not be the things that we want tend to help people regulate what they might otherwise very openly express in the workplace and in other situations. So that is explicit bias. It is out there and it is in your face about things. Are there any thoughts or any comments about this at this point?
I would like to add, for the purpose of this conversation and as coaches, this is not where we want to be, a conscious regulation. We want to have an elevated awareness of and own our reaction and make sure we are showing up the way we intend to show up. Not just because if we get cut, we will have repercussions that we might not like, but to do things because it is the right thing to do.
Because it is the right thing to do. And to know what it is the right thing to do, you have to fully understand who you are and where you're coming from and what may underlie some of the biases that you have. And let's just stipulate, we all have them. We all have biases, whether we know them or not. And it's those unknown biases that can really get us in trouble and are frankly at the basis of systemic racism. So let's talk a little bit about, well, let's talk a great bit about implicit bias. Implicit bias then are those attitudes that affect our understanding and decisions in an unconscious manner, unconsciously. They can be both favorable, but typically can be very unfavorable assessments. and are activated involuntarily and without the person's knowledge. So these things are ingrained in us. I'll give you an example. I have bias against working with women. I'll say that. And when I started thinking about what is the basis for that bias, I would very often say to myself, well, because of my career field as an engineer, I have been working primarily with men from college, all through college. The vast majority of my classmates were men. I became very accustomed to operating in their world and the way that they communicate. You know, the vast majority of the people that I interacted with in my first career were men, very acclimated, very used to the way that they could communicate, the way I always admired, the way that they could fight and fuss and then still finish up and go have a beer. And my experiences with women were not like that very much at all. When I started to dig a little deeper, it took me all the way back to middle school and early and late elementary school, and issues of bullying because I was the new kid in the school. And oh Lord, my mother was also a teacher at the school. And so I stuck out like a sore thumb. And it was not very nice. The things that I went through were not very nice. And so I started thinking about, could that be the source of some of this bias? And I've taken a number of actions. I won't belabor it, but I am now fully conscious of that. And when it begins to raise its head, I now know how to call myself on it and to seek out ways to dispel that. So that was my implicit bias. Others may have different experiences. But the thing about implicit bias is that it's very pervasive. Everybody has biases. Everybody. They don't necessarily align with what you say you do or what your beliefs are, your outward beliefs. So for instance, judges who are supposed to be the pillars of impartiality, they have biases. They tend to favor one's own in-group. So your group, whether you are Black or white or Hispanic or whatever, or women or men, they tend to favor that particular group or those groups that you are members of. And they are malleable. They can be changed with understanding and a depth of understanding and operating at that edge of uncomfortability. Say that 3 times real fast. You can find a way to raise them up, to bubble them up, and start addressing them, learning about them. Does anybody have any comments?
I think the 2 key things, go ahead, Ms. Martha.
Just that also, since they're so malleable, we are very much influenced by the media.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to put those 2 cents in there because I think that a lot of this has been exacerbated by the media.
For good and for bad, agreed.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 2 key things I want us to get out of this. One is pervasive. We all have it, right? It isn't an excuse to continue. We have it, so I can't help myself. Here's the key. It is not necessarily aligned with what you declare. So when you make a decision, and we all have moments when we think like, why did I do that? Why did I just say that? That I don't believe that. That's the time to stop and say, Don't excuse it away. Don't sweep it away. Don't say, yeah, that was just a slip of tongue, a Freudian slip. It is your consciousness telling you something is off. That is the time, like Paula said, go back, trace it. I'm a Black woman. I have a bias against fair-skinned Black men. When I was younger, if you was fair-skinned Black man and you're trying to talk to me, you had a whole bunch of rudeness coming your way. To stop myself and say, why? Because when I was little, just because you're fair, you were considered beautiful. And just because you're dark-skinned, you were considered you're not good enough, that you need to be fair. So in my little brain, as early as 10 years old, I wanted nothing to do with fair-skinned people. But I had to own that, right? Because many times these things bubble up and we excuse it away, and then we have this struggle with ourselves. People are seeing us one way, and we believe we're a different way. We are coaches. What are we going to do about it? We have clients coming to us asking, I keep doing things that I don't mean to do. How are we going to help them if we haven't confronted our own issues?
Absolutely.
This is Patricia. And I work with mostly, well, retired high school principal. And when I was working with a lot of the kids, the discipline and things, you come across a great deal of bias. And it is our natural reaction to push back when the bias is directed at us as an individual. And I will say for me, I push back with some force. But then I began to realize when I started acting upon my bias towards certain things and then brought to my attention, and I began to realize, but that's not really how I feel. That's not really how I think. At least I don't think I think like that. I had to confront that and say, why am I doing this? And readjust who I was. That helped me begin to understand that some of the bias things that are directed toward us, people don't even realize that they have them, and that is not really who they are. It is just something that's been ingrained when brought to their attention. And so I found a lot of times as I began to work with kids, and even before I was a coach, I would say, I find that interesting that you feel that way. Where's that coming from? I didn't even know that was coaching then. And as they began to talk, they began to talk their way through their own bias. And a lot of my friends that are not of the same ethnicity that I am had quite a few bias about me. But as we work through them, we laugh at them now. And sometimes we have to not be on the defense when the bias is directed at us, because it is frustrating, it is hurtful. And with the news showing it so much, I have to wonder, all of those people really believe all of that, or are they acting upon things that haven't been brought to their attention?
So, but that's the beauty of it, right, Ms. Patricia? We have to own our own, right? Ms. Martha brought up earlier that the news is planting, for good or bad. We wouldn't have known what happened if news weren't there. But we still need to own our own reaction and our own decisions. Hence the malleability. We can examine ourselves and say, this is not who I am or who I want to be anymore, and change it. It's up to us. Who says you can't? We are all product of our environment, right? We hear all the time, we are what we eat. But as a conscious adult, you can arrest your own belief system, you can halt your own worldview and change it at will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that Patricia Aurora has put into the chat. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And that was King Solomon many, many, many years ago, and how true that is today. Does anyone else have any comments or anything they'd like to
I did
share?
want to on the chat. Saying doing the work, reflecting and tracing bias back is the key.
Absolutely.
Yeah, ladies, I just commend both of you taking that example and the ability to share with us your journey of going back to where it was so that you could understand how it was created so that you can correct it. So that was powerful. Thank you.
And with, this is Barbara, with being able to share that, it helps others be willing to be open. And then having that open conversation to transferring it then to how does that impact the way we view our team members, how we view our colleagues, how we engage others in the community, even when we know we may have biases.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
not an excuse, though, for our behavior to hurt somebody else the way others have been hurt throughout years. So even though it gives us opportunity to talk, I don't want people to think it gives us an excuse to not be able to look at how do we want to make some adjustments and help each other with that.
That is correct. I shared with the ICF board here a couple of weeks ago that a number of my coaching calls had been that I have with other African Americans had been around this exact topic, how to have the talk. Their senior leaders, largely white,
Mm-hmm.
were coming to
Mm-hmm.
them and asking them, you know, what can we do? We want to understand from you, how can we help to make things better? How are you feeling? And many of the people who I was talking to, my clients, were asking me,
Mm-hmm.
how do I have this conversation? Because I don't necessarily trust their motivation. The only reason they're coming to me is because they think this is going to affect the bottom line in some way. They don't really care. They don't really care what I'm thinking. They don't really care how I feel. They want to get this over with as soon as possible so we can go back to the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
Those were some of the most difficult conversations to manage with those clients because I was dealing with my own stuff. And I shared with the board that one of the ways that I was dealing with it is that in my pre-coaching setup for myself, which usually took 2 or 3 minutes, it was taking me much, much longer to set aside my stuff so that I could be fully present for my client. Coaches on this line, what are you going to do to deal with your stuff so that you can be fully present for your clients? So I'll plant that seed. I'll plant that seed. And we're going to move on here. And
Excuse me.
oh, go ahead. Okay, I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
just have to get it off my chest. This is very difficult for me. I just came to the US last August. And I face this, I have no experience with this kind of a terrain we're treading here. However, I'm deeply affected by what's going on, and mostly because one of my sons, he's a police officer. I just have to say this because I think that media is doing one side and there's another side that is in the dark. And that is the willingness for people to put their lives on you know, like at risk to help keep peace and keep the law. And I can go to sleep at night without having a fear that something might happen to my son who's just doing his work. I just had to say that because I cannot continue this conversation until I say it. So I'm just being very honest with you. And I think it's very unfortunate, you know, like he says, I love my job, Mom. I love to help people, but I'm considering if I'm going to change my career because I don't come here to hurt others or to do harm. And, but I don't want to be at risk either so much. So I don't have to say.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing this. The truth of the matter is a human condition. My biggest issue with this is we're making it a black and white issue, a race issue. Bias is a human issue, right? And it's two sides of the coin. There are bad seeds in the police that are making all of police look like they're bad. But anybody with a thinking mind knows that's not true. So I personally commend every police person out there that is doing the right thing. And in the face of all of this, still go to work every day, knowing that people are hating them for protecting them. Having said that, we all need to face this bias because once we face it, then we can stand up and say, yes, I'm right. Or no, that's wrong. A policeman doing the right job, I truly believe will be protected. Are there bad seeds out there doing bad things and looting and burning things? Yes. But the truth, being on the side of right, always works. And if we face bias for what it is, we will ferret out all the bad seeds and address it. We can't say it's a police issue or it's a black issue, it's a white issue, it's a human issue. And we are coaches, coaching people at different levels of the organization. This is a systematic issue that if we can coach our individual clients at their level to face their own bias and to use their influence to change the system of bias, then we will be all protected.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. Thank you for sharing that, Martha. There is always, and because you're new to the country in a very, very tough period of time to come in, I'm a big proponent of education. And while I didn't put together a reading list to share, I'll be happy to do that if anyone is interested in having that. But it's very important, I think, to also understand the fraught relationship that African Americans in particular have had with police from the very beginning of modern policing. Modern policing began certainly in the South. The beginning of those, the roots of it, were in slave catchers. And then it has evolved over time. So there are a number of things from the historical perspective of learning about, again, it's going to the root of the bias. Root cause. I'm all about root cause. Where do things begin and how have they evolved to where they are? And then what is our role as people in dismantling those things and replacing it with systems that work equitably for everyone. Hard work.
I just
All
wanted
right.
to say to Martha, I hear you, and I know what you're going through in the sense that my son's in the National Guard, and I watch him struggle. I watch myself as a coach when my clients call me, because I've been stopped by the police and asked, where did I get my degree? Why am I a high school principal? Why do I live in this neighborhood? I've been pulled over for 20 minutes for going 10 miles, not 2 miles over the speed limit, and questioned forever. And yet when I'm coaching and then I see all the videos and I can relate to them, I have to harness who I am and my own emotions. And Paula, when you ask that, that is the biggest struggle of making sure that I stay open-minded, knowing my journey with the police, knowing that the police drove 45 miles down the road to ask my husband 3 days later, why was he in that other town? And he's a salesman, it's his territory. It's been his territory for 40 years. And yet keeping all that in my head and understanding why people are frustrated, but also understanding that not every policeman, not every National Guard person, not every law enforcement person is that way. And so being able, I don't know, you asked how do we do that? It's a struggle to coach and harness who you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to move on to an expression of implicit bias that I think may be an interesting conversation to have. So let me see. Here we go. So many of you may or may not have heard about this term microaggression. It's a term used for brief and commonplace daily actions, verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative, prejudicial slights and insults to a particular group, primarily those who are culturally marginalized. I pulled this slide off an Instagram post. My daughter, 22, almost 23, and my son are all very active in the social media universe on a bazillion different platforms. And so they have encouraged me to do some things there. So, you know, I got an IG account. I know how to move around. And so I came across this as I was preparing for this session. And I said, you know, here's an interesting thing. I bet while this was very focused on African Americans and microaggression there, and I'll get to that, some examples of that. But I often wondered, how do other people perceive microaggressions or think about microaggressions? So here are microaggressions from one Black woman's perspective. So saying you're so articulate to a Black person, you know, talking about soul food while you're looking at your Black coworker, asking your Black friends if you can touch their hair. These are considered microaggressions. These are those little underlying kind of things that we may never even think about. We may never think about if you're not Black. I don't know if you have any other examples, ChiChi, you might want to share at this point.
My favorite is I have Black friends. Okay, good for you.
So do I.
I mean, it's just, here's a question. Let's rephrase that a little bit. What have you said to a person of a race other than yours that got a reaction you weren't expecting? Like you say something and they looked at you like, what? To them, that's microaggression. Go ahead, Ms. Paula.
So my question to this audience, this very diverse audience, is what do microaggressions look like for white people? What might someone have said to you that you were like, what? Why would she or he say that to me? Anybody want to share?
I want to share. Being a white person that grew up multiculturally, every time I say that I come from Mexico, they ask me, well, do they have cell phones in Mexico? Do they have tomatoes in Mexico?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's interesting we're talking because it goes, Paula, you talked about education. I think that some of us have to decide that some people are extremely just naive. They just don't know any better.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what anybody else's faith is on here, but somebody told me recently when I said, that person is treating me like a real jerk. It didn't have anything to do with race, I don't think. I think it had to actually do something with my age because this person was quite a bit years younger. And the person I told this to, they said, Mom, just pray for that person. I said, oh, that's hard. They're being a jerk to me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that all of our experiences, and some of you know this and some of you don't, but I can recall an experience in a hospital when I was in a hospital and I was rooming with somebody who happened to be African American, and I actually had gone to schools all my life with very multicultural. But their family was so welcoming to me. Anytime her sister came to bring food, it was sharing. They split it in half for me. I can remember that, and you guys, some of you guys know how old I am. I mean, this was when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And so I always had that greatness of a human being, no matter who they were, that it was about sharing and being respectful to one another. And then I had some bad things happen to me over the years by people from not my own family that happened to be from different. And then I had other good things. But we have to really look at who we are. You guys are doing such a great job at saying, what is it? Reflect back on yourself, own it, and then be able to say, how do we move forward? So keep doing that. And everybody on this call, continue to be bold and ask yourself that. And the fact that we have ChiChi and Paula and Aurora, I know it's kind of in that back scene here, is that pick up the phone and call them and just talk. And I know ChiChi and Paula, you're going to listen and help us when we need help. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. So why did we share this slide of microaggression? Microaggression is one of the ways implicit unconscious biases rear up. So we need to learn to be present in our thoughts, in our words, in our action. The key thing we've been talking about here is elevated awareness. Stop, trace back, find out why are you doing the things that you don't want to do. So when you see these things come up, that's your clue. Something is off. My thought process and who I believe I am is not congruent. There's one coaching principle that I love so dearly. Each moment shows you who you are, I'm paraphrasing, and gives you an opportunity to decide who you want to be. Let's take that principle to heart. Every single moment we have that opportunity to understand, here is who I am, this is how I'm showing up right now. And choose, do I want to continue showing up this way? Or do I want to change it? And God in his infinite wisdom gave us things like this that give us clues. And we are coaches telling people to understand the clues that they have. Let's take it, learn it for ourselves, and be able to help our clients do better.
Absolutely, ChiChi. Is there anything else anyone wants to say here before we move on?
Yeah, Paula, so a couple of things. You know, ChiChi, you had, when you were talking about microaggressions and, you know, if you say a microaggression to someone and, you know, Black person, and they react like, give you a face, then that's an indicator that you've said something. But I also think that whether you're Black or white, the microaggression is, you know, the ones that came to my mind were because I'm a female, right, in the workplace. Those are the ones that I was thinking of. But people have become so accustomed to microaggressions and dealing with them and just trying to get their work done, trying to get their job done, trying to get through the day, that I think often people don't have a reaction when a microaggression is spoken to them. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. And then the other thing I've been thinking about is, I grew up in Houston and went to fairly diverse schools, like a private grade school, and then public, really diverse, and some of the supposedly best public schools in Houston. And there's so many things that I didn't learn and was, you know, taught that everyone has equal opportunity, right? Everyone's treated the same, everyone has equal opportunity. And so in many ways, I saw that that wasn't the case, primarily in dating Hispanic men getting pulled over for bogus reasons when they were driving. But then other ways, I believed that, and I took that at face value. So then there are just things that now I'm learning, like, you know, why don't we have more people of color that are school teachers, for example? And something I've just recently learned is that with the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, the integration of schools, Black teachers who had been teaching Black students were not allowed to teach white students, which therefore pretty much wiped out an entire group of Black teachers because they weren't available to teach in these integrated schools then. So like, what does that do to those families and generations coming up from them and their desire to teach? Anyway, so that's on me. That's on each of us to think about what have I been taught, what has soaked in, and is it true? And is there another story and another nuance and another perspective? So for me, that's what I'm trying to focus on is, you know, what do I know? What do I don't know? And how do I re-educate myself?
That actually is a great segue into the final third of our session here together. But I wanted to jump on one of those comments, or a number of comments we've all been talking about, and it's about knowing and acknowledging and operating at that point, at that edge of being uncomfortable. What I have started doing when these little things show up, when someone says something to me that is not quite right or hits me wrong, I now call it out. I might have let it go in times past, but now I call it out. So in a very coaching way, I don't use why.
Yeah.
What made you say that?
I love it.
So So calling it out, and that, for those who know me, is not the most comfortable stance for me. But calling things out is something that we're all going to have to get very practiced at in our places of work, in our homes, in our social groups.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to start calling things out. And so that moves right into, I think that's, yeah. What actions can you take? You know, this has all been about doing. We can write statements, solidarity statements, ally statements. We can give money. You know, organizations are giving money, writing big checks and things like that. But what are we doing, and what can we all do that is going to move toward making systemic change? The first place, we've talked a lot about it already, reflection. How are you culpable? And you look for signs. You look for those signs. We've talked a lot about that. And you call it out, where you work, where you have influence in your home. And what then must you do to put your own house in order? We got to start at home. We got to start in our places of work. That is where you start. So that reflection piece. What do you know? How do you inform yourself? Jessica just talked about some very good things about the education system, known to many of us, particularly for people like me who came from a family of educators who went through the integration cycle. And then don't resist the rush to dismiss anything without exploring it. You know how we can do? We can run up against something that feels particularly painful, whether it's about us or people that we love and respect, and we'll push it off. We'll avoid that pain, our personal pain, or causing it for somebody that we love or respect. We can't do that anymore. Can't do it.
Ms. Paula, what comes
Yes.
with this also is vulnerability.
Yes.
If you don't know, ask.
If you don't know, ask.
Jessica said a very good example. Somebody made a face at you. Stop and say, I'm sorry, why did you make that face? Did I say something? I must have missed something. I know it's not comfortable. I happen to be comfortable with doing that. But like Ms. Paula said, we need to get practice. She said, we're changing lives, right? We cannot leave the same way we came into this conversation today. So we have to decide what are the practical steps you can do. The education research is all there. Ask questions. People are giving you clue, their body language. Make yourself vulnerable. Did I say something that offended you? Can you explain? I didn't understand. That's not what I intended. Mm-hmm. You leave educated and you know not to do it again. Now you understand. And you know what? Like, just like ignorance is not a defensible argument in a court of law, when it comes to buyers, unconscious and ignorance of it, it's not acceptable. You can do something about it.
Martha put a very great question in the chat. She said, wouldn't the benefit of the doubt help? Like assume the best intentions. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. 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 I will tell you one of the tips that I shared with one of my African American clients who was asking me, how do I prepare for this conversation with my white senior vice president, is I said, don't overwhelm them. Answer the question that is asked, and then wait for the follow-up. You may have 45 years of wrongs and issues and feelings and hurts that you want to unleash at this point. But resist the urge to overwhelm them. Let them lead the conversation and you provide that information. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Absolutely.
Ms. Paula, on the back of that, as coaches, as we're helping our leaders discuss, everybody wants to put a statement out on this. Everybody wants to say something. As you're helping your leaders do this, make sure you're telling them it is beyond words. Whatever they put out there, let it be something they can action on and something they intend to keep doing. But most of all, help them see that it is in their power to look at their policies, their procedures, whatever their system is set up on, that has this microaggression built in it, that has ignorance built in it, to change it. Because if you don't see it as a microaggression, or if you don't understand what it means, you don't see the pain. And you're looking at the person that's seeing it, and they're reacting to the pain that is in the system, and you're looking at them that they have a problem. So you're not perpetuating the problem. It becomes a vicious cycle. So as coaches, we have the power to help our leaders and people that can make a difference, change the policies, change the systems that can make things better.
Yes. So we are right up against the hour. I think I have here, we're right here at these actions. So seek to understand, learn. So I will be assembling kind of a reading list. We'll get those out to you. We talked about asking those questions and honoring the feelings of the people that you're speaking to, whether you're challenging them about a microaggression or you're seeking to understand their position about a particular issue. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not digging deeply enough.
And as coaches, one of the big things we do for our client is to acknowledge, right? We need to acknowledge what they're feeling. When somebody, and that's the way to build that trust. Once you can let somebody know, I might not understand what you're feeling, but I acknowledge that what you're feeling is valid. You open up that room for them to have better conversation with you.
That's right. The bottom line, everyone, do something about it. That is it.
Power.
You have the power. And there you have it. We are right here. I know some people have probably already had to zoom out, but we want to thank you all for being here today. Your presence speaks to us of commitment. We are all allies here. We're all working toward the same goals. I know that I speak for ChiChi when I say, if you need anything, if you want to understand more, please reach out to us. Reach out to any of us. Let's support each other. Let's help educate each other. Let's share each other's pain. And together, we have the power. We have the power to start moving in a systemic change direction.
I believe we all have one person can change a lot of things. Now imagine if we all come together in our individual spheres and decide to change this, what we can do for San Antonio.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here.